Hello and welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm here with Parisa Noble, and you can find us every Wednesday on YouTube at 10 a.m. Eastern Time in the United States, 3 p.m. London, and 11 p.m. Hong Kong. You can subscribe to us on YouTube to watch the video on demand, and you can also subscribe to us on all the usual podcast platforms like Apple and Google, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio. I was looking at the analytics of all the different podcast platforms people use to watch the show, and there's so many different platforms I'd never heard of. So not Crowdcast, but just a bunch. I can't even remember the names. They're so random. So whatever random podcast platform you might be using to listen to podcasts, be sure to check us out. I'm excited for our next guest. First time on the show. His name's Tony Ford. He's a consultant, or actually a managing consultant that's been with Third Stage for a while now. And the reason we want him on the show is to talk about a transformation in progress. We're actually providing some quality assurance and oversight and just providing the overall governance for a Dynamics 365 implementation for a large multinational retailer that is based in Saudi Arabia. So the reason this case study is so interesting is because the project is happening right now. We're in the midst of moving from design into build for the new technology, and it's a perfect time to bring him on the show and talk about what some of the initial findings are and what some of the initial challenges and lessons are from that project. So without any further ado, Tony, thanks for being on the show today.
Appreciate it, Eric. I'm glad you invited me. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Good to have you here. So we want to unpack this case study that you and I have been talking about. It's a client of ours. But maybe to start, even though we can't mention them by name or reveal any sort of confidential information, what can you tell us about the client as far as size, industry, just a general overview? Why don't we start there?
Yeah, the client's a major Middle Eastern furniture retailer. They're going through a major digital transformation across 5 areas of their business, including sales, customer relationship management, finance, HR, supply chain, complete supply chain with procurement, order fulfillment, warehousing, and logistics, and another area they call communications and design. They are implementing Microsoft D365. And the major suite application suite areas are CRM, retail and commerce, financials, let's see here, supply chain, HR. They've engaged Microsoft and a third-party provider that's regional to do their system implementation, provide system implementation services. They are anticipating going live late 2021 toward the end of the year, December timeframe. So that's pretty much what they're doing. They're heavy into the project. They're in the late analysis phase, going into design at this point, but they're moving forward.
Okay. And why did this particular organization, why did this client decide to go through this transformation now? In other words, why didn't they do it years ago, or why didn't they wait till the future? Is there some sort of tipping point or impetus for triggering this transformation now for them?
Yeah, they've got a couple of I'll call it major events that are kind of going on in their industry. One is obviously the way that they're interacting with their customers changing and evolving, especially from the standpoint of doing a lot more digital, online type of interaction with their customers. That's happening more and more frequently. Obviously, of course, given 2021 with the pandemic, we've all gone through a whole lot of digital changes of how we conduct business and do business, whether it's like we're doing right now, or whether it's interacting with the customer through a sales channel. It's changed quite a bit. That's probably the biggest thing. And given their technology platform right now, I think the ability to adapt and move with the changes become a little bit more difficult for them. In addition to that, their growth has increased tremendously in the country of Saudi Arabia. There's a lot of development going on. There are a lot of government initiatives that are pushing the development of real estate. And so since they're in the furniture business, obviously, there's a huge growth in furniture sales. So if you combine that with a change in how sales is being done and an increase in the sales due to a lot of external factors in in their market, it's pushing them to realize we may have some limitations on how we can adapt to the change and grow with it. So I think that's a big reason. They've got a whole army of strategic objectives that they've lined up with this. But if you want to get down to the core root of what's kind of pushing them down this path, those are a couple of real big things that are pushing them down this path.
Yeah, yeah. And so they're being disrupted in their own way, just like a lot of organizations in today's day and age. And it's kind of forcing them into
Just a lot of
transformation
changes.
towards.
Right, just a lot of change, and I think again, ability. If they've got and from what I can see, and I'm not in a position to get real close to some of their older technologies, but from what I can see in some of the high-level diagrams that I've seen around their current platform, you can see there's some restrictiveness in how they might be able to change with their business and their customer base. Absolutely.
Yeah. Right. So what did they hire us to do? So they decide, for a number of reasons that you just described, they decide they're going to go on this journey, this whole transformation. They pick Dynamics 365. They pick a local system integrator. Why did they hire us, and what are they asking us to do for them?
Yeah, they've hired us to provide project quality assurance. That's a big phrase, but if I kind of focus it, there's kind of two areas of focus that they want us to participate in and help them with. One is an ongoing, I'll call it project health check, where we're actually providing this review and assessment of their abilities to monitor and control the project over time. We're doing it, twice a month, around the beginning of the month, middle of the month, and we're reporting directly to their steering committee as well as their project management team what we're seeing and what we're observing about how they're conducting the project. And what we're doing is we're looking at not only how the project management team is managing the project, but the implementation methodology and approach and how they're going about doing and delivering on the project. That's an ongoing activity. The other side of the coin here is we're also providing what we, at third stage, we'll call stage gates, where we are at the beginning of a particular, and it tends to match up pretty well to the phases of the project. So they've got 6 phases of the project. And the first couple of weeks of the project, we're going through a particular assessment in a particular area of focus to a particular phase of the project. For example, when we landed on the project, and we kind of got there a little late, so we had to hurry up and catch up. But, the first activity was to do a project startup, a review and assessment, just to make sure that a lot of the mechanisms were in place to effectively manage the project. So, there are 6 of those, and each of them has a formalized report where we assess their abilities to start up the project, the analysis, design, development, deployment phases, and just kind of making sure that we have the right standards and procedures in place to be effective. That they have the right procedures to be in place to be effective. So,
When they hired us, was there any early warning sign that they were seeing, or any concern they had with the system integrator or the implementation in general that was specifically why they hired us, or was it more of a risk mitigation way to hedge?
that's a really good question. It's never come up in the conversation, but I have to believe that they had some concern. Obviously, it's always a good idea to have project QA, and more importantly, a third party, so that you can have a perspective outside of the folks who are actually involved in this. Kind of like the police and the police, right? You want to make sure that you get a third party from the outside, making sure that they're getting a third-party perspective of things to make sure everybody's doing what they're supposed to be doing in the right time in the right place. So I didn't get any impression when I walked in the door that there was anything particular. Nothing was communicated to me. But obviously, as we continue our conversation here, you'll see that there was a few things that began to surface, and maybe they already knew that, and they just needed a third party to come in and say that, but that never was formally communicated to us in that way. So,
Right. Yeah, it's interesting because a lot of clients, it seems like they're kind of split. You have some clients that say, hey, we see a problem here, we see a risk, and therefore we want to hire you, third stage, to come provide the quality assurance here to help us remediate that problem. And then you have other clients that say, hey, we don't see any problems yet, but we don't know what we don't know, and we want someone to just help us through the journey. So it's interesting how you get both kinds of clients. So it sounds like it's TBD on the real reason why they brought us in. Maybe it's a bit of
You
both.
know, as we got into the process, and you start to get a feel for some of the project dynamics and interaction with the different factions on the project, you did get a feel that maybe, for example, maybe the steering committee was a little concerned and wanted a third party perspective. It's not a spoken thing, and we'll talk about some of the cultural things later on, but it's not necessarily a spoken thing. But you get the impression that someone was maybe seeing some red flags that maybe kind of caused some concern, and they thought they needed a third party to come in and assess what was going on. Absolutely.
Yeah, yeah, that's interesting. So we're in the early stages of the project. You mentioned that we're sort of in that design, late in the design phase of the project. What at this point in the project, what are some of the biggest challenges and risks, pitfalls that you're seeing so far in this whole QA process?
Okay, well, let me just talk in general, just some general conversations around some learnings that I've had to go through, given the dynamics and the distance and that so forth, things related to the project. And then we'll talk a little bit about some things a little bit more specific to the actual work. But as far as my interaction with the client itself, there's been a few little challenges that are probably a little bit out of the norm for me in particular. I do know, culturally speaking, there's a few differences that I've had to adapt to, but nothing major. But you know, you can see some of the change. For example, I'll give you a good example. Some of the use of the English language. A little different, you know. We Americans, we recognize the multi-use of single words, but sometimes our foreign friends don't necessarily always recognize that if we use word in multiple ways, it means multiple things. So I've had to adapt a little bit to make sure that I'm communicating in a way, and I've even found myself, it's kind of like when you're around folks and they have a particular way of saying things, you start to say it the same way, right? Well, I've tried to use certain words in the same way because they recognize it in that way. So they use the word alignment a lot for agreement. So I've had to kind of flip and make a couple of minor changes like that. There's a little bit different style of communication and management. There's a little bit more. They're a little more hierarchical. So they want a little bit more of an order in the communication, which that's okay. I understand that. There's a little bit more of a need for completeness of answers as opposed to having partial answers where we have some open-endedness to the answer to a question. And I started to realize that too in the implementation methodology that they were using on the project, a need to get complete answers. And one of the issues that you start to see in the new way of doing software implementation and development is when you start doing a more iterative approach, you don't have all the answers as you're going through the various cycles of the iteration. Of course, hopefully what's happening is you're getting more information and more information as you move down the cycle. But early on, you might not have all the details that you need, but you still have to move forward in the process. So that's a little bit different from that perspective. From a standpoint of how to operate from a distance, it's been a little bit of a challenge in some places because as you're doing QA, you know, you have to do a couple of things. One is you want to review artifacts and to make sure that you're seeing some of the documentation and the standards and the templates and the things like that you need to see. At the same time, that gives you one level of understanding, but the other level is to get a feel for what the people are thinking about the project and how it's moving forward. And so getting a chance to have some interaction with the folks who are actually, you know, doing the work and participating, it can be very invaluable because, you know, on the surface, things might look well, but you know, sooner or later, you if things are not moving well, or if they're moving well, you'll hear it from the folks who are involved in the project. So that's a little bit of a challenge because of the time difference, the remoteness, because of the 9-hour difference. It's a big difference of time. So having finding time to communicate. So it's early in the morning for me. It's late in the afternoon for them, and it's time to go home. So finding some time to be effective at communicating and getting information from the participants can be a little bit of a challenge. So the time zone and the distance, they all make a little, but so we've had to find some creative ways to, luckily they do record a lot of the sessions, which is good, because that way I can participate without physically being in a live meeting. I find myself often on the weekends and some evenings, rather than watching television or something like that, listening to some of the sessions to see how it was going. So that allowed me to participate not just in work sessions, and I'm not there to critique the work. I'm just trying to see how it's going and what they're doing, how they're delivering, and what they're delivering out of the process. The other area is sitting in on what I consider important project status meetings, seeing how the teams are reporting and seeing how deliverables are being how things are getting documented, and how how they're reporting the status and that sort of thing. So having those recordings was probably the biggest help for me from the standpoint of getting some real involvement in what they're doing, just so I can observe and see what's going on. One of the things I learned early on was that reviewing the artifacts that they were producing wasn't always giving me the perspective that I really needed to get. So that was a really, really big help. And then the last thing I think was probably the turnaround on questions. Of course, the time difference causes, there are times when you want to ask just some simple questions, and sometimes, the fact that you're remote and you don't have this immediate, I can walk around the corner and talk to someone and get a quick question, or even an email for that fact. You might have to wait 24 hours for an email to come back, just because the time lag was so significant. They're asleep when I'm awake and vice versa. So you just got to find a way to get around that kind of thing. So those are some of the logistical things that were making the situation a little bit difficult. But you learn, you adapt. I think I've often talked about this, but I have a phrase where you adapt, improvise, and overcome. So you just have to find a way to make it work when you're in these scenarios. So
Yeah. I think you hit on the sore spots for a lot of organizations. Maybe not sore spot, but the challenge that a lot of organizations are having in this day and age, whether they're multinational and or just dealing with a remote delivery environment where they still have segments, or in some cases all of their project teams spread out throughout the world and collaborating remotely. So you kind of hit on some of the key challenges there.
right. One of the other challenges before we move on, one of the other challenges that I encountered too was, and this is not unique to this project. This is probably more unique to a quality assurance function, which is walking in and having to gain the trust of the project team, because you walk in the door and you say you're QA, so the first response, the first thought in their mind is, this guy's walking in the door, he's just there to kind of be very critical of me, and it could be a negative, a negative perception attached to whatever he's or she is. Whatever the outcome of the assessment. So, you have to learn to overcome that, and we did. We walked in the door. I learned a long time ago. The way to overcome that is to tell folks, well, I'm not just coming there to be critical. I'm coming there to be critical, but I'm coming to bring some value to help you get better. And I think when you start to communicate to folks that you're just not here to come hit them over the head with something, but you're here to identify risk. And to help them mitigate and to make things better, and you continue to send that message. I think at some point, and then you start to show in your actions. You're not trying to do that. It starts to take hold, and they recognize you're not here for the, you're not here to throw them under the bus or anything like that. So,
Yeah, you're here to help and share a common goal of making the client successful. Really.
Yep. And it's huge because you're trying to get at information, and if these folks don't feel comfortable with you, they're withholding information, and they're not sharing data and reports and things like that, and you're hunting and pecking all over the place trying to find it, making your job less efficient. When you gain that trust, everything just seems to unfold and come out a lot easier, and that's a huge thing when you're doing this QA kind of process. So
Yeah. Makes total sense. Well, I want to dive into that, some follow-up questions there, just around the challenges and some of the risks
Okay.
of the project itself,
Okay.
when
Okay.
we come back from a break. But we'll take a quick break first. I'm here with Tony Ford, talking about quality assurance on a Microsoft Dynamics 365 transformation. We're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us, or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Okay, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control. I'm here with Tony Ford. We're chatting about a large transformation effort and some of the lessons learned in our quality assurance role, helping a client through their transformation. Before we jump back into the questions, just a quick reminder that you can follow us on social media. You can follow Third Stage on LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter. And you can also subscribe to us on YouTube as well if you're not already subscribed there, watching us there. So, Tony, before the break, we were talking about some of the challenges that this transformation has, or some of the challenges you've seen so far with this transformation, and a lot of those points you made were sort of the foundational structure of how a team collaborates and how you deal with a multinational team and dealing with different time zones and cultures and things of that nature. But what about the project itself when you think about some of the change management or business process or technology issues that you may be seeing so far, whether it's obvious issues or risks that are starting to creep up below the surface?
Yeah.
What are some of those things you're seeing so far early in the project?
Yeah, well, I think probably if, there's a couple of categories of challenges that we started to notice as we got into the project. The first area was just the area of project management unto itself. There was the style of project management seemed to be a little bit, how should I say this, less rigorous. That's the word I was searching for. It was pretty apparent to me when I walked in the door after I'd spent some time here that some of the rigor that was necessary for this is a fairly complex implementation. They've got a lot of moving parts. They've got multiple business units involved. They got two purely different vendors working. So there's a lot of constituents who are interested, and stakeholders who are interested in this process. So my approach, for project management has always been one of start with the cookbook, your methodology being the cookbook, but then to adapt it to the circumstances. And sometimes the circumstances dictate, well, I don't need that kind of rigor. It's a less complex project, single implementation. That sort of, you adapt to it. But when you got more, when you're adding more business units, more perspectives, more applications, more vendors, a lot of moving parts, then you really have to have some rigor in the process. And one of the first things that I noticed right off the bat was that the rigor was not, and when I say I noticed, the first thing we do, Eric, when we walk into these types of situations is we look for some key documents, and then we start looking for key elements that we would think would be associated with a fairly successful project management plan. And so we look for a project management plan which covers all the areas that wouldn't be necessary to effectively manage a project. The other thing that we look for is a project management charter, a project charter. I think a lot of times what happens is my experience has been with the more successful projects, you don't overlook these key startup elements, a management plan and a charter, because they lay the foundation for how decisions are made, what tools we're using, what standards we're following, whether it's standard templates, what deliverables are in the process, not just the contractual deliverables where at the end of phase I need to get a sign off, but what are the interim deliverables that are necessary to build up to maybe a phased sign off, where there may be contractual payments associated with a deliverable. So we walked in the door. We started looking for those things, and that charter is really important because it becomes the Bible, if you will, for keeping the project on course. It has the original expectations, the original business case, and it, in some ways, it has the business case to project/solution alignment, so that you have a benchmark to go back to make sure that what you're trying to deliver, you're still going in the direction of delivering to the value that the project is expected to deliver to. So right off the bat, we discovered that some of those things were missing. And one of the things I noticed too was that there was a lot of project management by presentation. We're looking, you're asking the questions, you're looking for artifacts, you're looking for, one of the first things I usually ask when I walk into a project is, so where's your document management, your project document management document? Usually if that's there, it lays out everything pretty well so that I don't have to go all over the place looking for your template, your methodology, your deliverables, where things are and how things are being placed, and who's responsible for placing them there. Are they secured? All the things that would kind of give me the roadmap to identify and find documentation, so I don't have to go look for it. That was my initial red flag, that there was some concern. And then of course, when I didn't see the first two artifacts, there was another couple more red flags. So I think the first thing I noticed here, that there was some issues and concerns around that. And then we communicated that in that first stage gate, right, which is the project management review, startup review. We insisted that we would continue to monitor and to make sure that those things were in place. The second area that was of concern was the actual implementation approach. And the way I'll characterize the implementation approach was that there did not seem to be an approach that was iterative in nature, and it required multiple iterations of deliverable review confirmation, if you will. And so there seemed to be this in their project plan and their approach, a big build up to, say, an analysis and design deliverable sign off. And I got the impression, I've never seen the contract, the SOW, so I don't know for sure, but my gut feel is that there are the milestones that have been identified in the project plan and are driving that are probably contractual obligations where payments are to be received, and they're tied into payments. So in a project this big, iterative deliverables and confirmation will alleviate some of the pain around getting confirmation and understanding before we build up to this big bang kind of deliverable. And that's kind of what the approach was. It's a big bang. We're going to get to the design phase, and we're going to have this big deliverable, big set of deliverables. So that was the first concern that I have. The second concern I had was that there was some serious rework around their first. The approach was to have two CRPs in the beginning, one for confirmation of requirements and a second one to confirm design, which I thought was, so the first thing I noticed was they combined analysis and design into one phase, which was with a big single deliverable of a combined analysis, requirements, and design in a single deliverable, which One, it's a lengthy process, a long process to get to a huge deliverable that requires multiple levels of skill to evaluate for sign-off. So those were some significant problems that I saw. Then the second thing that became fairly apparent was when they completed their CRP1, there were some struggles with taking APQC models and using those to drive out requirements with the client when the client was not very familiar with APQC models, process models. So it turned into the client couldn't talk that language, and so rather than the system integrator saying we're going to build our understanding of the business based on something you're familiar with, which may be your business processes, and then we'll translate that into an APQC model. They took the path of taking the model and bringing it in and using it as a guide, in which it was a terrible guide, and they ended up having to rework that whole exercise, which lost 4 weeks in the project. It's because they had to repeat the cycle because they were not performing, getting the performance out of the process and moving forward. So that was the first. That was a real another red flag. So my biggest issue so far has been with the lack of rigor in how project management is being done, and the approach that doesn't seem to be an iterative approach that builds on the knowledge. And a case in point was the initial understanding of the scope of gaps was that the Microsoft D365 application was a 100% fit, which that's another red flag for me too, because I've never seen an ERP, even the best of them, a 100% fit. So setting an expectation, and I'm not sure if the vendor, or the SI, or Microsoft were part of that process, but usually if you're going through a software eval, you're going to have your first iteration or understanding of where there are some fit gap issues that have to be dealt with. And so that never occurred. So I think there was a misleading expectation that there was a 100% with the application. And so because you're not having this iterative approach to understanding, some of these things might come out a little faster if we'd had a little bit more of gather, build some understanding, and get some level of confirmation. And so you're starting to see this kind of play out now, because the difficulty right now is they've uncovered over 200 gaps, and with a significant of them being potentially custom software resolved gaps. And so this is kind of the process that we're in right now. And what we've tried to suggest to them as an approach is to break up the requirements gathering separate from the design activities, and push the design activities into the development cycle, so that we can get our hands around the full scope of the project by understanding the requirements gaps and high-level solution options, if you will, with maybe some relative estimating of complexity, so we kind of know how complex those things are. To better get their hands around what the scope change is going to be, because you can see now there's going to be a significant scope change. So I think the biggest challenge right now is getting them to get their hands around it and pushing design into the development cycle. I mean, at least the more detailed design into the development cycle. So it's pretty obvious that there's going to be a significant replanning around the scope change, and so by understanding that sooner rather than later, at least it gives them a chance to start replanning. So that's kind of the biggest issues right now.
Yeah, and you hit a couple of really big ones there. I mean, with the project governance / discipline / implementation approach. I mean, just the whole program management, project management methodology, that whole piece of it. You touched on the business process side of it with APQC, which, for those of you that don't know, APQC is a sort of a technology agnostic business process best practice framework that you can use as a starting point to really flesh out in more detail how specifically your business processes work. And then you also talked about the gaps, some of the technological gaps between the software that was being deployed and what their actual needs were. And to your point, you're never going to have a perfect fit with a new ERP solution. You hope to get as close as you can, but whether or not 200 modifications or 200 gaps is a flaw in the evaluation process or not, that we weren't involved in that, so we don't really know necessarily. But those are some pretty pretty common risks that we see with a lot of clients. What about on the change side or the people side? Are you seeing, are we far enough along in the project yet, given that we're still, we haven't gotten to the testing and all the, where the rubber meets the road sort of parts of the project yet, but have there been any initial change management issues or some warning signs that you're seeing on the people side of the equation?
I think the biggest issue on the people side from a change perspective, and we haven't delved too much into that, but I could say at this point, a big concern is just an understanding of how things are going to change. I get the impression, I have not been intimately involved in some of the sessions or even had some level of surveying, if you will, assessment of the potential impact to the change, but you can see it's going to be fairly significant. Some of their business processes are going to change fairly significantly. So you can assume that there's going to be some level of, and I don't have a good perspective yet of the maturity of the organization to some of the changes that are going to be coming down the pipe. We're going to try to get to some of that here real soon, but we just don't have that perspective. It's been a little bit of a firefight at this point, just to kind of help them get their hands around the project and some significant replanning around the scope of work and how we approach it moving forward. I think once we kind of maybe get them to a point of feeling a little bit more comfortable in that area, we can maybe start to focus on some of the other areas. I can tell you too that some of the areas that seem to have some concern too are the data migration. The data migration is another area that seems to be lagging behind. And I just I hate to really say this, but it just seems like I heard this this morning from the CIO from our particular client, that there seems to be some areas of naivety on the clients on the SI side, and so one of the other issues has been around commitment level to the resources and whether they have the right people or not. So this is one of those situations where there are some significant issues to overcome. Not that we can't do that, we can't help them get there, but some of the challenges that I've had has been that I've had to maybe refocus a little bit of my effort where before we had some dedicated hours to do some things, and we've had to kind of burn up a few more hours in a different area because there's a need to get the client to help them right the ship in some places. So
yeah, which is the whole reason why they hired us and where our value is in this case, for sure.
Yeah. I would say at this point the value, I see the value in that sort of thing. So, but anyway, go ahead.
Yeah. So based on what you've learned about the client so far, and again, I know it's early, and that's the whole purpose of having the conversation now, is it's always fun to have these sorts of case studies unpacked as they're happening, rather than just sort of a postmortem after the fact. We can kind of get into the thick of things as they're happening. But as you look at the lessons so far, even though it's early in the project, what sort of lessons have come out of this project in particular that might be just sort of words of advice or wisdom to an organization or a team that's about to start on a transformation? What advice would you give them as sort of a closing question here?
I think one is to make sure that you do your basic blocking and tackling, to use a football analogy, right? It's an old cliche to say that, but in this situation, it's just making sure that we set up everything in the beginning. Take the time to put the right checks and balances in place. Make sure that you have a process that is frequently reviewing and getting confirmation. ERP implementations by nature change, and you have to constantly be evaluating the change to make sure you understand how it's going to impact you going forward. The other thing too is to make sure that you have the tools in place that allow you to simulate and model the change as it's occurring, so you understand what's happening and where it's going long before it gets there. You don't want to be just in front of the change when it's occurring. You want to be able to say, okay, I understand what's about to happen, and we're not going to freak out about it. It's just it's just the nature of this type of implementation. Some things change. The business is changing rapidly. I mean, it's even more so now than, say, maybe 10 years ago. The businesses are changing rapidly. And so given that, you could be in the midst of an implementation and the business changing rapidly is affecting where you may go with the implementation. You may alter the priority of what goes live and what goes maybe in Go Live 2 or Go Live 3 or what have you. But, unless you have the tools in place to do that, you can't evaluate that. So my word of the wise, I guess, would be make sure you put everything in place. Take the time. Do the right project management. Project management is a project killer if you don't do it right. Make sure you do all the necessary things to get things in place to manage effectively and get your dashboards in place so that you can predict better. And then make sure that you have an approach that frequently reviews and confirms. And it doesn't mean you have to have all the answers at any one point in time. You build to your answer. But to wait till you get to some huge, long-term, big deliverable at the end of some phase, now we're going back to old traditional waterfall type of project, right? Where you're waiting till you get to the end of a project to say, I'm going to do a checkpoint and go forward. Well, yeah, in today's world, with the way things are changing, you can't wait that long anymore.
Yeah, and it also delays the uncovering of risks or problems. When you have that super long delay and wait to get the full deliverables in place.
Absolutely. And these projects, they're big, they're changing. There's some complex requirements, and so you gotta be constantly reviewing and confirming. And at the end of the day, it's the customer, it's the client that's going to tell you what's right for the business. You can't dictate. You can't say, I'm an integrator, I think I understand everything that's important to your business. I may understand multiple perspectives because I've got an industry experience, but I don't know the unique perspective of this particular customer, and we have to recognize it and change with it. So,
yeah, that's a great point, and a great closing thought is that just because you have a system integrator that's an expert in a particular type of software, whether it's Microsoft or Oracle, SAP, NetSuite, Workday, whatever it is, it doesn't mean they're good project managers, and it sounds funny hearing that sometimes. You think, well, what do you mean? I looked at the proposal and they've got a project manager on the project. You have to remember that a lot of these system integrators grew up in the world of building, designing and building software, not necessarily complex program management. A lot of the stuff you're talking about is more program management, program governance, controls, methodologies, all that stuff that's outside the realm of technology per se. So it's an important point that I think a lot of people miss.
It's funny, and as a final comment, it's funny you should say that because I just made the comment the other day that just because you come from one of the large, even if you come from one of the large integrators like a KPMG or a Price Waterhouse or Deloitte or somebody like that, it always comes back down to you. You may have the backing from those organizations, but it always comes down to the individual team and project management on site with the client and their abilities to do the work and to manage effectively. So don't trust that you got a great organization behind you, because sometimes the people that get deployed aren't always have the skill sets that are necessary.
Yeah, trust but verify. Which good.
Absolutely.
That really wraps. I mean, that sort of summarizes everything that we're doing for this client too. Is I think they trust, but they're also asking us to trust but verify, and identify some of the gaps and weaknesses and deficiencies in the overall approach and plan, and help them navigate those. So that's a good feedback for us. Good. Well, thanks for being on the show. This is really helpful, and hopefully it's given our listeners some things to think about as they embark on their transformation journeys. And again, doesn't really matter if it's a D365 or Microsoft type of transformation, or whether you're talking about SAP, Oracle, or any other technology out there. A lot of what you're talking about is completely agnostic and applies to any sort of transformation. So I really appreciate your feedback and help and time here too, Tony.
I appreciate you inviting me to the podcast. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You bet. And we're gonna take a quick break. Thanks again for being here, Tony. We're gonna take a quick break, and we'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.